I will do my best to finish my presentation in 20 minutes. My presentation will be a bit different by means of, I can say, the philosophical background that I have. I'm not coming from social sciences, but rather from humanities background. The main difference between social science and humanities is putting the stress on not numbers, as the sociologists will do, but on people, as the psychologists will do. I will deal mainly with how person by person refugees are influenced by the surging problems in the Middle East, and how Turkish citizens are influenced by what is going on in the region. One major difference between social sciences and humanities is the failure of social sciences to realize that what we are speaking about are actually human beings. Social sciences deals with human beings by means of numbers, whereas one person is not just a number. I will, in order to take you into the mood, I will show you some pictures. Whereas the iconic picture we have seen in Dr. Wilkins' presentation is certainly an iconic picture by means of showing huge number of people who are gathered in a destroyed city. For me, this picture is rather iconic because it tells the story of an Iranian lady who is looking for a better life for her child in Europe. A major misunderstanding about the refugee problem is reading the refugee problem into the Syrian refugee issue, into the Syrian problem. The refugee problem is a global problem, and it is not the source of refugees are not only the Syrian conflict. There are Iraqi people, Kurdish people, Yazidis from Iraq, Orthodox Arabs from Iraq who have been fleeing their countries. Afghanis, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Indians are using Turkey as a passage into the promised land, meaning Europe, for a better future. Many people run away from their current conditions, not necessarily war, not necessarily security-based, but it may be as in Iran, they are running towards something, not running away from something. These are actual human beings looking for a better life, not usually for themselves, but usually for the next generation. There is a huge dynamism in this. Many people, particularly in Europe, started to realize the humanitarian side of the refugee problem only when the refugees started to flow into Europe, particularly through the Aegean Sea. Look at this picture. This is already Europe. This is a picture from the beach of Kos Island, which is a Greek island, very close to Turkey. The mountainous areas you see on the background is in fact Turkey. So the distance between Turkey and the Kos Island is a swimming distance. You can swim this distance within an hour. And even in the worst case, a boat reaches to Kos Island in 45 minutes. The problem is that there is a strong stream in between the Kos Island and the Turkish coast. And in order to run away from Turkish coastal guards, the refugees use these kinds of boats, and they usually swim in the night. They are quite welcomed in the Greek side on condition that they won't stay in Greece, but leave Greece within weeks towards the core of Europe, mainly Germany or sometimes the Scandinavian countries. So the Greek coastal guards are quite helpful, to those people. People die while passing this, short distance, not because the distance is so dangerous, but because they use boats overcrowdedly. There are about 50 people on this boat, which is actually produced for maximum 15 people. And usually they're not used by professional captains. People buy them from the market in western seacoast cities of Turkey and try to sail towards Greek islands. Once they reach to the Greek island, they are usually taken by larger boats used by Greek captains to be taken into the mainland, and from there use trains to reach to Macedonia, and from there try to reach Germany. Look at this picture. This picture tells us this girl is born on the way to Europe. We cannot call her a refugee in the sense that she left her country, because she's born on the way. A part of the refugee problem in Turkey is the newborn babies. 60,000 so far, 60,000 Syrian babies are born in Turkey. This is almost larger than the total number of any European countries accepted up until now. So, let me move to my presentation. This is an Iranian boy thanking God for being able to reach to the Greek coast island healthy. As I said, the refugees are flowing into Turkey and through Turkey into Europe using several different ways. Some of them can fly into European cities, and through there they reach to Germany and the Scandinavian countries. Usually the smugglers are in the picture. The cost of smuggling a refugee from Turkey into Europe changes according to which road you use. It may be as cheap as $700 if you are just passing the sea road I have shown to you, but it can reach up to 20,000 euros if you are using the air way. Let me tell you a few important topics before I start the major problems I will discuss about the refugees in Turkey. Turkey has, as you already know, over 2 million refugees in Turkey, and many people think that the problem is mainly about the settlement of those refugees. No, refugees bring in lots of social security, psychological problems with them. One major problem that the refugees brought into Turkey is inducing new ethnic differences. The demography of several cities on the the border area towards the Syrian territories have changed. Like, for example, a small city of Kilis, it used to have 59,000 Turkish citizens. Now it has more than 70,000 Arab refugees in it. So the population of the city is more than double, and this has caused lots of problems. The municipal services were designed according to half of that population. The social services, health coverage, were designed only for half of that population. So despite the fact that the Turkish government provides full health coverage to all the Syrian refugees who are in Turkey without asking any question, without any payment, the fact that hospitals are not built for such a huge population is still there. And this does not only influence the Syrian refugees, this influences the Turkish citizens living there, because when you go to a hospital you realize that the line is more than doubled. and your chance to see a doctor on the same day diminished because of the Syrian newcomers, and this creates all kinds of problems. The same is true for labor issues. For the time being, Syrian refugees do not have the work permit in Turkey, but illegally Turkish businessmen employ them because they are ready to work even 1/4 of the salary that a regular Turkish worker asks for. And this means unemployment for Turkish labor forces. In cases where Turkish workers are employed, not related to the Syrian refugee issue, but people are tended towards creating conspiracies and claiming that they are unemployed just because the bosses are employing the Syrians. And of course, the Syrian newcomers are victimized because of these conspiracies, claims. People who are unemployed usually want revenge from the Syrians. And we have seen conflicts emerging, particularly in the border towns of Maraş, Mardin, and Gaziantep, where the unemployment rates are peaking recently. There are problems, economic dimensions, as Dr. Bilgin has already mentioned. The economic burden of refugee crisis on Turkey is unbearable already. Already more than $6 billion is spent. Some of this amount is spent because of short-sightedness of the Turkish government. I will mention this issue when I pass to the legal situation of the refugees in Turkey. But some because of lack of international interest in sharing the burden of Turkey. There are religious issues also. The newcomers are mainly Sunnis, but there are cities where Turkish Shiites are living, like Hatay. The city of Hatay was dominantly Shiite before the flux of the refugees into the city. Now it is dominantly Sunni, and the Shiites used to support the Assad regime, whereas the newcomers are opposition people, so there were all kinds of internal conflicts. The Turkish government had to resettle some of the refugees from that city to cities where the overall population is dominantly Sunni, in order to prevent future clashes between the two populations. Of course, these are going to have far-fetching problems in the future, because we foresee that within 4 or 5 years, the Turkish government will realize that these people are there to stay. Yes, in the pictures of major cities in Syria, even if the civil war has finished today, it will take more than 10 years to rebuild Syria and make Syria ready to reclaim that population. The overall problem is not just the displaced people who are outside Syria nowadays. The number of Syrian refugees outside the country is over 4 million, but over 7 million Syrians are internally displaced in Syria. And the first thing the new government have to cope with will be, first of all, settling down that displaced 7 million. And only after then they will be ready to speak about the returning of the refugees. As I mentioned, several newborn babies most probably will never want to turn back. And the refugee problem started 4 years ago. The children at the ages of 7 to 12 at that time now are teenagers who are grown into Turkey, who took no proper Arabic or Syrian education. They will be losing years if they want to turn back to their home countries. So most of them will actually drag their families in Turkey and won't want to turn back. Well, I have to say that the Turkish government has done an amendable, beautiful job by means of establishing refugee camps. The picture is from the Suruç refugee camp, the largest one in Turkey that can host 30,000 refugees. The camp was elected by I don't know what does it mean, electing, by New York Times as the best on the world. But as Dr. Bilgin said, only 1/10 of refugees in Turkey are hosted by the refugee camps. And even if you are living in the best refugee camp, believe me, you would want to be free instead of living in a refugee camp. If you are living in a refugee camp, this means you are in an open prison. They won't let you out without prior permission. They will say you can leave the camp in the dawn, but you have to turn back before the dark. You cannot work outside. If there is working facilities within the camp, meaning, for example, if you are a doctor, you can work in a hospital established within the camp. If you are a teacher, you can work in a school established within the camp. But if you are a construction worker, there is no construction within the camp, so you don't have any work to work. And you are not let to work outside the camp. So many people prefer to leave the camps and live in the cities and work for their own livelihoods. But even then, you are not free to move between cities. When you choose a city to stay, the Turkish government gives you a temporary residence permit, and that permit is valid only for the city that you are registered in, meaning you can take health coverage and food aid coverage only in that city. If you prefer to move, let us say, if you think Istanbul has more jobs for you and if you wanted to move from Izmir to Istanbul instead, you are uncovered by health coverage and food aid coverage anymore. So this is one reason why many refugees do not want even to be registered, despite the fact that registration gives them lots of rights. One major issue is about the legal situation. I will speak shortly about the legal situation. Turkey has been applying a open doors policy towards the refugees up until very recently. Very recently, when European Union reached an agreement with Turkey by means of using Turkey as a kind of buffer zone between the refugees and Europe, Turkey started to work on a similar arrangement between northern Syrian lands and Turkey itself. So Turkey is seeking to establish a buffer zone within Syria so as to keep the Syrian refugees in Syria and provide humanitarian aid to Syrians in Syria instead of accepting them into Turkey, which will increase Turkish own problems. Turkey has signed and ratified the 1951 Geneva Convention on Refugees, but with geographical consideration. What does this mean? This means Turkey accepts only refugees from European Union, not from Eastern countries. This means what we call Syrian refugee is not a refugee in the Turkish standard. Turkish law calls them guests, not refugees. Under the new law that was passed in 2014, that is called Law on Protection of Foreigners and Refugees, these refugees have a temporary permit to stay in Turkey, but they still do not have the full rights of refugees that are covered under the 1951 Convention. 1951 Convention suggests that refugees have to be given right to education, right to habitat, meaning housing, whereas the guests under law on protection of foreigners are just given the right to stay in Turkey. Other rights are not covered, meaning if you leave the refugee camp, you are on your own. You have to establish your housing on your own. The government does not provide you housing. Yes, you can be given health coverage, but only if first you find yourself a house and a rental agreement, a rental contract. What does this mean? You're a Syrian, you go to the city of Gaziantep, for example, you have to hire a house in order to have a registration with the government, in order to have health coverage and food coverage. Of course, the locals in Gaziantep knows this. This has increased the rental prices on almost 5-fold. Hiring a house in Gaziantep, which is a southeastern city, is as expensive as hiring a house in Istanbul. This of course has influenced the locals themselves. So if you are a teacher in Gaziantep, all your salary cannot pay for your hiring expenditures, because whereas it was something like $250 5 years ago to hire a humble house, now it is about $1,000 to hire a house in Turkey, and no teacher is paid $1,000 as a salary. So the people are angry to the refugees, because they have been increasing the inflation also in the cities that they are coming. They have been decreasing the quality of services that people are themselves taking. It is creating all kinds of problems. The compulsory registration seems to give the refugees advantages of health coverage, but that compulsory registration also diminishes the prospective rights of refugees to flee into Europe. Europe agrees refugees only if they are not registered in Turkey. So many people do not want to be registered. So when they are registered, they are not registered, there is no health coverage for them. This is quite a problematic situation. I will mention what can be done on these issues in the end of the problem. Let me speak about some related problems that emerge. So many people do not realize that the refugee issues do create such problems. A polygamy problem has emerged, despite the fact that Turkish society abhors polygamy generally. The new-coming population is mainly ladies, some of them, huge numbers actually, widowed ladies. And the Turkish population has usurped this. Turkish men are getting beautiful Syrian ladies as second, third, fourth wives. You can buy, since, frankly, literally speaking, you can buy a wife from a refugee camp. I have already mentioned the sectarian disputes that started. The refugees, the child labor problem was already there before the refugees came, but it increased immensely. It increased immensely because Syrian children are ready to work, and many people think that they are doing something good by employing them, because they say, see, these are poor people, they need work, so I'm giving them work and doing something humanitarian, some kind of humanitarian aid, whereas what they are doing is a humanitarian crime, actually. The newcomers have induced an uncontrolled urban development in cities, in the border towns, because the construction industry realized the increasing rental prices, so they started to build unplanned buildings all around those cities. You have to see the scene of those cities. Even after the refugees turn back, if they ever turn back, we will have to deal with those buildings, destroy them and rebuild the cities. The heritage of refugee problem will be a decades-old problem in Turkey also. It's not only Syrian cities will need to be rebuilt, but several Turkish cities will need to be rebuilt also. As I mentioned, I already mentioned this regional inflation. There is an emerging problem of ghettoization of Syrians. Syrians in larger cities are establishing their own ghettos, and of course, in those ghettos, the crime rates are much higher than they are. The Turkish police forces, security forces are not ready to cope with Arabic-speaking thugs and so on. They have created street mobs, all kinds of security problems started to emerge also. Sometimes there are claims that the refugees are creating law and order problems. Most of the cases, these are baseless allegations, but even the baseless allegations have created a kind of prejudice against the Syrian refugees. And these are all problems that the Turkish system has to deal with. One major issue is education. There are 550,000 Syrian children at the age of primary education in Turkey. To the best of our knowledge, only 50,000 of those are taking any kind of education. Meaning 500,000 students, children at the ages between 7 to 15 are not taking any education at home. These children, when they turn back to Syria, if they ever turn back to, they will be uneducated, illiterate completely. The Turkish government has provided rights, but some of these rights are only on the paper. They say, okay, we have established schools in the refugee camps, but what about the children outside the refugee camps? 9 out of 10 children are outside the refugee camps. And the Turkish government says that they can go and enroll to any public school. What does this mean? They will take education in Turkish. Well, Turkish teachers are completely untrained about teaching Turkish as a second language. And the Syrian children, most of them lack even their mother tongue, particularly children who are grown for the last 4 years in Turkey. Their Arabic is not even good enough to take education, let alone their Turkish. So they prefer not to go to schools at all. And in fact, the Turkish education system that just is overcrowded already. There is no seating for extra students in public schools in Turkey. So in principle, when the United Nations asks Turkey, what are you doing about the education of refugees, they say, well, they are welcomed to public schools. But if you go to a public school, you are not that welcomed at all. The education problem is there for university educations and so on, and it seems that it's going to be one permanent aspect of the problem. I will say a few words about the ISIS factor. I have already passed my 20 minutes. Oh, let me say this. The ISIS only increased the number of refugees, but this does not mean everybody is escaping from ISIS. A majority of the people are escaping still from the forces of the regime. There is a fear of Aleppo that is a real fear among the Turkish politicians. Aleppo is an overcrowded city. About 2 million people are living in Aleppo, and Aleppo is just 40 minutes drive from Turkish borders. So if ISIS or the forces of the regime enter into Aleppo, that 2 million will escape towards Turkey. There's a real fear in Turkey, and there is no way to stop them within Syria because it is already on the borderline. So within years, within the coming years, if the ISIS problem is not stopped, if there is no permanent solution to the regime versus the opposition fight in Syria, we may see another 2 million newcomers into Turkey. Because of that, Turkey has been trying on establishing a buffer zone that may include Aleppo in the future, so that they won't be ever coming into Turkey. ISIS also controls 7 out of 9 border crossings into Turkey. This prevents many, economic relations between Syria and Turkey. Those border crossings are literally closed for the time being. I will say a few words about the impact of the latest elections. Turkey had 2 elections in the last 5 months. In June the 7th, there was a general election. In November the 1st, there was a rerunning of the election. In between 3 months, Turkey had lost at 3 months where the government did nothing on anything, including the refugee problem. So people, well, there are lots of legislations that needs to be passed as an emergency for the integration of the refugees and so on, but they are not passing. Hopefully, this week the new government is going to be established, and the new cabinet will start working new laws that needs to be passed in order to help the refugee problem ease. There is a fact that the single-party governments are more effective in Turkey. In the last elections, in June 7 elections, the Justice and Development Party had lost its majority to establish a single-party government, but in November 1st, they managed to become strong enough in the parliament to establish a single-party government. That is an advantage, but the Turkish society is overtly politically polarized. 50% of the public hates other 50%. And when it comes to solving problems of the refugees, you need a unified public rhetoric. Whereas when the government wants to do anything, the oppositions usually do not collaborate. And that makes things even more difficult for Turkey to cope with the problem. The new government is strong enough to push for a constitutional change in Turkey, and the government wants to change the parliamentary system of Turkey into an executive presidential system, whereby making the current president Recep Tayyip Erdogan as the new elected king of Turkey. Of course, that will make the Turkish system quite similar to the Syrian system, and if I was a refugee in Turkey, I would say, okay, let me look for another country, because I have suffered under an elected king in Syria. Why to suffer under another elected king in Turkey? Unfortunately, the current Turkish scene of freedom of expression, human rights, does not offer much to the refugees in Syria. That is one of the major reasons why very recently the refugees started to look for Europe instead of staying and establishing a future life in Turkey. One last slide. I will say that there is an opportunity in the refugee problem in itself. Turkey has now 2 million Arabic-speaking people living in Turkey, whereas we lacked diplomats, intelligence agents speaking in Arabic. Now we can utilize this overall population. But unfortunately, since Turkey lacks the highly skilled immigration law, where Europe does have it, we didn't naturalize the refugees, the educated refugees. European countries are coming, making interviews in Turkey, and they are actually pushing the brain drain of Syrian refugees. If you are a doctor, a physician, a university graduate, a PhD holder, Germany takes you in without any question. And this has created a problem within Turkey, because the rather educated segments of the refugees are fleeing to Europe, and we are stuck with the undereducated, disadvantaged population of the Syrians. And it makes the problem even worse, because we don't have the middle people that will serve as a kind of bridge between Turkish bureaucracy and the Syrian refugees. We have been lobbying in Turkey as the intellectuals of Turkish society to pass a highly skilled immigration law so as to keep the skilled Syrian labor in Turkey, so that they can establish their schools, they can establish their own hospitals, they can deal with the services that the Syrian refugees will be needing. The differences in Syria policy with the West will have to end. If you ask any question about those differentials, I will say a few words also. But I can say Turkey has also learned immensely from this refugee crisis. Just before this refugee crisis, Turkey had established humanitarian aid organization called AFAD. And now AFAD, within 4 years, became the most experienced refugee accepting organization. In the long run, this will certainly serve to the interest of refugees all around the world, not only in Turkey. I thank you very much for your patience. I overspoke, and my apologies to you. Thank you.